Welcome everyone. Today I'm here with Narin Xavier de Saini, and we're going to be having a pretty interesting conversation about disrupting the law, being a new kind of advisor, thinking outside the box. And because Narin deals mostly with financial advice firms and deal structuring, we're also going to talk a little bit about what he's learned through the art of the deal when it comes to financial advice firms doing mergers, acquisitions, buying businesses. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting conversation. Had the chance to meet Narin recently, and I said, how is it that we've not got to speak before? Pretty interesting guy, and looking forward to having a great chat. Narin's been operating and lived in different countries. He works mostly, as I said before, with financial advice businesses, but also to a large degree with highly regulated professions. And it's that scope that's really allowed him to think differently about the law. And he was trying to convince me that it was that background and experience that led him to think differently. I just actually think it does. And he has some different points of view that are really helping him to invent what I think is the kind of advice law firm of the future. So if anyone wants to contact Narin once we get into it, you can visit his website, which is ascenta.co, so ASCENTA.co. And I'm going to point this out because I said to him, what would you like me to share as a result of this in terms of how people can contact you? And his answer was, give them my mobile phone number. Just even that is a little different. So at risk of looking bad, because I'm not about to publish my mobile phone number now, you can also contact Narin. I won't read it out, but you can check it out in the description. And you can also get that off his website, which I've given you already. So welcome, Narin.
Thank you, guys.
So, are you a lawyer? Are you really a lawyer? Because the more I talk with you, the more I'm like, hey, wow, this guy's really thinking differently. I'm not sure that was a real question, but I'm going to let you answer it anyway.
Yeah, I started out life as a lawyer, I think. I'd like to think I've gone beyond a little bit of that. Once someone told me in a cab ride, you don't really sound or look like a lawyer. Which I thought was maybe a good thing, or maybe it's a bad thing sometimes. Depends, I guess, on the context. At the end of the day, I'd like to just think of myself as someone who's helping other people solve their problems. And I think a lot of lawyers probably think that. A lot of advisors probably think that. It's just that when we approach our firm and the approach the way we do things, it's not purely focused on a legal way of doing things. It's really focused on the outcome, the target, the strategy, and how best to really achieve that strategy.
Yeah, I'm actually going to jump in here and say, well, how did I get to speak to Narin in the first place? And the reason is because multiple people mentioned Narin to me. And if I were to sum that up, it would be to say, doesn't think like a lot of lawyers, is focused on the client's outcome, and really allows people to have great outcomes for less hassle and sometimes significantly less cost for a great outcome. And once we get into talking about disruption and some of the things that Narin's doing, you'll probably get an idea of why he's able to do that. But it's also the focus on which bit comes first. Am I a lawyer, or am I there to help people create better outcomes? And I think that same question applies to any advisor. And for me, advice is my passion. And Narin certainly sees himself as an advisor to empower his clients rather than being first and foremost a lawyer. And when it comes to putting deals together, I think that's really important. So I'm actually just checking out his website as I'm looking, and the very first thing in bold print is, we help you grow and do deals. So what does that mean to you? So when you're working with the clients, we help you grow and do deals. That's not what I'd normally expect to have as the 90%, screen surface space of an above the fold website for a lawyer. So what does that mean to you?
Well, to me, it means I'm here to actually help you get something done. It means I'm taking off a lawyer hat. I'm not coming at a problem with a preconceived idea of how it should get done. I'm really coming at it as, what do you want to get done? What are you really thinking? What do you really want to achieve? And how can I get you there? And that's why it's so important to us, I guess, that to have that as flashing straight up, because I'm not going to sit down there and say I know a bunch of things. These are all of the legal updates, because at the end of the day, those things are really the tools that help me to get something done for you. And so that's what that means. It means if I need to step in a little bit more and provide a little bit more guidance, or connect someone with another advisor, I'll do that. If it means I need to take a step back, I'll do that.
Yeah, you said something interesting when we were having a chat before jumping on, and it was along the lines of, saying to people, sometimes a lawyer's just going to get in the way, and maybe, here's some ways that you can go about coming to a deal without needing to go down the path of getting lawyers to do these bits. I thought that was a pretty interesting philosophy for a lawyer to point out.
Yeah, I think every advisor needs to, in a sense, take a little bit of that view, because the fact is we're there in an advisory role to kind of help get an objective done. And this is all about the outcome at the end of the day. Sometimes you actually bring too much to the table, and that too much really clutters the objective. And so we sit back and we say, listen, you're really the quarterback. You're the captain of this ship. This is your business, and this is your strategy. We're here to guide that a little bit. But the fact is, sometimes we need to sit back. You need to actually take hold of the reins. You need to steer this thing, because you know what you really want. And if you speak from the heart, or you speak from your experience, you're probably going to end up with a better outcome than someone else being your mouthpiece.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. But I'm going to come back to the philosophy that you talked about, and that is, what is the outcome that you're looking for, as opposed to what is the role that you have as a professional. And I think this misconception's got in the way for almost all professional services to a large degree. If I take financial advisors as an example, the narrow focus has been, well, getting funds under management, or getting insurance, and the advice that you're giving really only extends to how does it translate into looking after someone's superannuation or whatever it might be. And not that clients don't need help with that, and not that there's anything wrong with giving advice on portfolios and superannuation funds, but it's more the narrow definition, as opposed to, well, do you even need a superannuation fund? Like, what's the key here? And the key has to be the client benefit first. And I think understanding that that's the focus, and knowing how to bring that value to the table, people are willing to pay for that. They're always willing to pay for it. And the obstacle is really in the mind of the professional. And I agree, we all need to have that focus. But I'm telling you now that I've bought 5 practices myself in the financial advice space in previous lifetime, and I've been a part of, I don't even know how many, dozens upon dozens of deals for clients where I've been a part of deal transactions, etc. And what I would say is that in most cases, certainly not all, but in most cases, I think the lawyers see themselves as carrying out a role as a lawyer, and forget that their role is actually to help their clients achieve, an outcome. And it's not that they forget it entirely, it's that the order of priority is mixed up. So it's being the lawyer first, outcome second, as opposed to outcome first, lawyer second. And I think that's the focus, whether you're an accountant, a financial advisor, a lawyer, a business coach. Forget the doctrine that you have as a definition and focus on the client outcome first. So
that's a really great way to put that.
Yeah. And I actually impressed myself. It's the first time I've defined it that way, but it is the difference. It's the order of priority. And if you have the priority wrong in your head, then your behavior is going to be compromised throughout all of your interactions. And if I were to say the one thing that stood out to me when I met you is that very clearly your priority was on, I'm here to help the client have a good outcome first and do something. And the law and my knowledge and capability is just one of the tools I can bring to the table to help make sure that happens.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely right.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other disruptive things you're doing in the legal space. So you've started your own business, and I'd maybe like to talk a little bit about that. And when we were preparing for this chat, there's kind of two things I want to cover. And should I do two videos or should I focus on one? And that is, we've got a really disruptive lawyer who's an advisor. And the other is that someone who has a huge amount of insight into advice firms and doing deals and mergers and acquisitions. And I think both of those are particularly interesting to the advisor audience that we have. But I decided we're going to do a mash, and rather than try and separate any of those, we'll include both. So how long ago did you start your firm, Narin?
2013 was when I started my first firm. So it's a little bit of a journey, which is great actually. So in 2013, we started the first firm, and that went really well. And in 2015, we joined up with another firm. I grew a little bit more, and I decided after a couple of years there that I wanted to go a little bit in a different direction, and I've always been a little bit of a maverick. So I decided, all right, let's restart this thing. I've had enough experience with business. So in August last year, we started Ascenta, and we essentially built the firm saying, well, we built a firm now with everything around, all the technology and outsourcing and all those sort of things. What would that look like? And that's pretty much what we are.
It's interesting. I'm just going to touch on that briefly for a second. I've worked with, I don't know how many business owners of advice firms, but a lot. And I would say 90% of the ones that are doing good things have been through that evolution that you very casually kind of glossed over there. And that is starting a business, going into some form of partnership, finding that maybe there wasn't, the mutual alignment, and then going through that process of finding new direction. And so I just want to point out that is not an unusual thing. And it happens all of the time. So if you're watching this and you own your own business and you haven't been in partnership, be very careful, get advice before you go ahead. It's always a good learning experience. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that partnerships can't work, but most of the time, in order to find business owners either go through multiple iterations of that before getting the right one, go through the experience before saying, you know what, I need to kind of do it my own way, and then choosing the path. And I think, as we're seeing, you're doing a lot of disruptive stuff, and we'll delve into that. Do you think you would be doing it that way if you hadn't gone through the evolution? Sometimes it takes doing the team up to go, actually, that's not what I want, so you can decide to do the things that you really want to.
No, I think that you definitely have to do that. I think you can only find your direction if you try a different bunch of things. And and I see a stark difference between, I guess, people who are, I guess, stuck in the corporate world. You start with one job and you jump from one corporate to another corporate. You don't really, in a sense, try anything different. If you're really looking for direction, even though you don't even know you're lost, sometimes by mixing it up a little bit, you find out that you are a little bit lost, or you find a little bit of direction. So I think that's absolutely necessary in a journey.
So what did you decide that you really wanted to do before you started a center? How did you decide that you wanted to do things differently?
How I decided? Well, I think
what did you decide that you wanted to do differently?
Yeah, so I decided what I wanted to do was I wanted the ability to implement technology quickly. I wanted the ability to test different ideas really quickly, discard ideas really quickly, to be able to collaborate with clients unrestrained, so without having to sit down and pass it through a bunch of different people, to give the people I'm working with a lot of freedom. Because essentially when you're stuck in an environment where you always have to think about whether people are going to shoot down your ideas, it's not very conducive for testing new things. And because I started working with a few different startups, and I also started working with high growth advice businesses. And the way I saw them working was, you'd have a leader at the top, or you have a small core group of team of people who knew, who shared, I guess, the same mindset. And I didn't quite see that where I was. And I said, well, I want to be in a business like that. And the only way I could be in a business like that was to create my own, really. And so that's how I started with the idea that that's what I want to do. I want to have a business where we can have ideas tested, built. We have a client as a focus, and we're unrestrained, really. So I knew in the environment that I was, nothing was going to happen there. So why not just build it?
So your background before starting the first business for yourself, was that in a more corporate environment? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Singapore, and I came here for my law degree. Probably watched too much TV and decided to go to New York and do the bar exam. Just a little bit mad, because that's essentially a 2-day exam from 9 to 4, and it's not open book, unlike the law exams here. I passed that, did some work there, came back, worked at a small boutique firm, and interestingly, that's where I actually fell into working with financial advice businesses, because we were right next door to advisors to financial advice businesses, and that's essentially how we fell into that. So it wasn't really a large corporate environment, I guess, but it was a few different things.
Okay, so if we were to talk about a traditional law firm, whether it's a small boutique or a corporate, how do you go about building a business? So someone starts out as a lawyer, business grows, then they put on, maybe some article clerks, maybe some legal secretaries, maybe some additional support people, and then as the business grows, you need more expertise. So you're trying to round out the expertise. So maybe you bring on another partner. This is kind of been setting the scene for how, laws develop for a long period of time until you get to the big corporations. And then the goal is you come in, you work your way up from article clerk to associate, senior associate. And the goal is to make partner, and then you reach partner and the pressure is immensely greater. And when we talk about partner, it's a bit different to being a partner in an accounting firm where you actually own a percentage of the business. It's more like partner in name only. And so in the big corporates, when they decide they need to free up a space to bring in a new partner to make the pyramid work, then you can be asked to move along. And so that's kind of, and don't mean to sound cynical, but there are some cynical aspects about that, as I have for accounting and financial planning and all other professional services. But you're not doing any of that.
No, none of that. I figured if we're going to build a business, I firstly didn't want a business that essentially was constrained by a hierarchy like that. I mean, you need support units, but they're really one and the same. They're there to support a function in a business, so it's really a flat function in a sense. We don't really have partners or anything like that. What we have is we have lawyers who come in when we need to, and we have great partnerships with people like Lawyers on Demand and Olegal, who really can bring in the lawyers and the expertise that we need. But there's no reason to have a bunch of associates trying to achieve a certain billable hour, or try to climb over each other, or have a silo system where you have an employment law team which focus on their clients, and then you have a corporate team focused on their clients, the finance team. It just doesn't work. And I know that there are firms who try to mix it up and things like that. But what I figured was, if we're going to build something that's focused on the advice and focused on the client, then you really need to build the teams based on the client and based on the project. And that's really how we approach each project in a sense. And so that's how the firm is built.
So how does that work practically? So you get a client come in, right? Your first focus is to help them create an outcome.
Well, that's right.
Instead of just giving them a legal proposal, you're looking at it from a project point of view and what their outcome is. So maybe you need expertise or resources that you don't have. So how do you go about kind of building that team? And you talked about a couple of different tools like Lawyers on Demand. Could you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So that's exactly what we do. We sit down and we say, all right, this is what you're doing. Let's say you're buying out a partner or a unit holder in a business that you're involved with. That's great, but you have employment law issues, you have tax issues, you have accounting issues, and you have to maybe deal with your dealer group, you have to look at the authorized rep agreement, and you may have some regulatory issues. And so we say, all right, well, who are the people best served around to serve those needs? So we really kind of build the team out, and we say, all right, well, employment will be this person, regulatory might be this other person. But the benefit of doing that and not being tied to a firm structure or a usual business structure is that we can also read the personalities and say, well, all right, I've got two really great regulatory lawyers who can do the job, but who's going to be able to gel with you better? I'm not tied to one or the other. The fact is I can pick and choose as the client needs, essentially. Then we build out the scope, and then we use Asana, which is really the project management tool. We invite people to Asana, we put the tasks out there, and everyone knows what's happening, and then you just project manage that way.
And so you're essentially building a team built for the particular project that you're working on.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, I was kind of talking about this with Narin before, even at the Social Advisor as an example. We used to have 3 full-time videographers as part of the business. And, having them employed full-time meant that we needed to go out and create work that we were doing for clients. What we do now is we'll custom build a project team if there's a client situation. So we might be working with, a software firm in the advice space or something like that. And we need to build a website. We need to film a whole bunch of client stories, etc. And what we do is we build a team for that particular project. And we've got the core group here that then supervises, manages it, handles the client interaction, so that everything is completely seamless. What I've found is that you can actually get better quality people that way, but at an overall much more cost-effective price. And so we found that as well. And it means that you're not having to keep this, expert in one thing on staff as part of the team. They can come into the mix, but only really where they're going to provide the most leverage and benefit. So how have you found that's affected your ability to scale your business in a reasonably short space of time? Like, what impact has that had on you?
Well, I think that the greatest thing is it frees up a lot of my time. That's number one. I recently met with our outsourced CFO guys, and they said your margins are through the roof for the industry, because it's something like 85%, because we're not really constrained in that usual structure. It also means that when we sit down with people, sometimes they're a little bit reluctant, and they say, well, how are you going to resource that? And then we pull out these case studies, and they say, oh wow, okay, you can do this, you can do that. So yeah, just tell me your project, I'll manage that for you, because what are you after? And they'll say, well, we want to do this. And I'll say, all right, I'll get the team for you. And that's pretty much it. So that really means that it's all about focusing on the projects. Then you focus on the project, you build a team, and then you go on to the next project, you build the next team. And so you're not really stuck with a bunch of people who are then overworked, essentially, because everyone's really spread out. And that means you can scale up pretty quickly. It also means you scale down pretty quickly if you need to. And it also means you can take a break if you need to, which is pretty important.
Actually a very important point, because having a large team produces a lot of pressure as a business owner. You've got to be there. You've got to be producing revenue, engaging with clients. And most of the pressure comes from the expense layer that you build up over time. Whereas having this more flexible means of building project team really allows you to remove a lot of that risk. And I would definitely say that's the case. And just using the example for our creative team, so 3 full-time videographers, graphic design, web developer, IT systems person, we no longer have that team. So for a period of 9 months, we were completely focused on not doing any work for clients. We were just focused on service delivery, engagement models, replacing grandfathered commissions, increasing revenue, increasing profit, rather than, business development activities. And it meant that there was no pressure for me to, maintain these salaries. So far more flexible, not just in terms of if you want to take a break, but also if your business focus and interests shift as well. And so that allows you to be a lot more nimble than other legal firms. Absolutely, no doubt about that. It also means that you don't limit your scope of the kinds of deals that you can get access to. Would that be fair? So if it was just you and the traditional model, and you had a couple of staff, and then you had a really big and complex deal, how do you solve it? What, do you go and employ another lawyer to just work on that deal? And so that's one of the challenges that I think all advice firms have faced today. And we're seeing this happen across accounting and financial advice and mortgage broking, and where a lot of businesses are now adopting a far more flexible model, whether it's through building project teams. So you might call that, freelance engagement, whether it's through offshoring or, onshoring, but it's allowing the ability to expand in much more flexible ways. Are you seeing that in advice firms that you deal with? How much of what you're doing are you seeing them apply?
I actually am starting to see it quite a bit. So some of the firms that we're working with, they've been in offshoring for a number of years. Some of them own their own offshore team, and so they actually have a satellite office over there managed by either someone from their team, or essentially become an extension of their team. And so that's becoming pretty common. I know that Paul Tynan, who you had a couple of months ago, he's helped a few advisors with a bit of offshoring, and he's a little bit in that space as well. And he's pretty big in that area. So that's become quite big. We've seen, I don't know if we've seen that much of consultants and things like that, but we are starting to see a little bit more of opening of the reins, where you've got, I guess, a few more, I guess, all these advisors who are now floating around with dealer groups and compliance and things like that becoming a lot more difficult. Some people are starting to leave, and I think there's some firms, some practices out there who are actually accommodating some of these advisors who are floating about in slightly different ways. And so they're starting to do business in a bit different ways. So it's definitely happening. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I was curious to see what you were seeing. I'm certainly, with the businesses that we're working with, one of the things that we try and break down is this misconception of the box. So, you live in this box of providing portfolio and retirement planning advice, instead of saying, here's a client, what's their life, where are they now, where do they want to be, what can we do to help them get there? And I personally think that financial advisors and accountants are very well positioned to be able to then take a project management space to solve all kinds of problems. A basic example of that's estate planning. So a lot of advisors will go, you got to do your will, and then they'll refer them to a lawyer or tell them they've got to go and speak to their lawyer, where it's a much better holistic experience if the advisor says, we're going to project manage this whole legacy piece, and we're going to engage, the lawyer on your behalf. We're going to walk you through the process. We're going to engage the accountant, make sure they're involved. And the clients are, in my experience, very happy to pay for the fact that they're getting a much deeper engagement level. And so that's just one example of where, if you're a financial advisor watching this, that what Narin's doing in terms of building out expert project teams doesn't just have to be within your area of expertise like law or financial advice, but it can allow you to be a project manager for, a much broader advice team. And we're certainly seeing advisors who are breaking down that barrier expand their service offering, and certainly the revenue that they're producing from their clients. And it's flexible. And it means that you're getting a better overall outcome, but someone's coordinating it. And that's essentially what you're doing in the legal space. You're project managing an expert team to create a designated outcome.
That's right. And I think the benefit as well, an additional benefit of doing that is because you're going beyond your usual scope of what you normally do or what you're comfortable with, you actually gain insight in a whole bunch of different areas, which then means you become a better advisor.
Absolutely. That's very well said, Narin. I could not agree with you more. We've got to take the blinkers off and be looking outside of. Typically, when we are working with an advice firm, we're going to expand their revenue just in one part, and that's the outside the box project management fees for their clients. So what I mean by that is, in my experience across a client base of financial advice, and by the way, same numbers for an accounting firm. So the biggest difference between accounting and financial advice as opposed to legal firms is that you've got a client that you're doing work for every year. So you're building up a history and a relationship. So you're actually in the perfect position to identify that every year 20 or 30% of your clients are going to have problems that they have got unresolved. That if someone were willing to come in and say, you know what, I can help you solve that because I'm your advisor, and even if I don't have the expertise on the particular things, I'll project manage it for you, because that's really the obstacle. The obstacle is someone who knows you and that you trust being able to take the headspace off of you and look at it objectively. So, you know, a typical advice firm, let's say they're producing $1 million of revenue. Just this one factor can very easily allow them to add, you know, another 300,000 of revenue for the same costs, just by project managing, problem solving for them. And this isn't a one-off thing. This is something we've just replicated over and over. And that's just one example. But it's because they're opening the scope. And then what happens every time is once an advisor starts doing this, they no longer think of themselves in this small box. They're starting to see all kinds of ways to create more value for their clients. They're helping them grow their businesses faster, develop their careers, have better relationships, and they actually get paid for it, as opposed to kind of doing it for free, but never really doing it properly. And so that's a big area. And I wanted to focus on that because of your comments. It absolutely makes you a better advisor. And it's that priority. Which are you first? Are you a financial advisor first? Or are you an advisor there to help make your client's life better first? And if you're that one first, and your expertise as a financial advisor is just one thing in your tool bag that you can use to create an outcome for a client.
Yeah, that's right, and I think financial advisors are particularly well placed, and accountants, I guess, financial advisors and accountants are really well placed to take advantage of that, because I always tell people, you guys are essentially the gateway to the other advisors. You know, lawyers, you know, we're always getting referrals from financial advisors, from accountants. They are the gatekeepers of everything. They know intimately their clients. And so there's a lot of value that can be created there. But it's unfortunate because you also see a lot of people just squander that opportunity to sit in that role.
Yeah, I think it is those blinkers, you know, you can't see what you can't see. So you've got to actually take those off. And, you know, there's a lot of people that are feeling like now's a bad time to be a financial advisor if I'm just focusing on, you know, that profession, because we've been through all of the changes that have happened, Royal Commission. I actually think that's a great catalyst. So the firms that we've worked with, typically, you know, they come to us and say, help us grow our business and get new clients. And most of the time they don't need new clients. They can double their revenue just by what they have right in front of them. And more than double the impact they're having, like really change every aspect of their client's quality of life. So, and are you seeing some of that starting to happen in the firms that you work with in the financial advice space? People are talking about it in another box term, and that's regulated and non-regulated advice.
Right. We're starting to see a little bit more of it, but I think where I would really like to see more of it, at least because I deal a lot with mergers and acquisitions, is really bringing that thinking into acquisitions or into sales. So, you know, a lot of the time what we see is, you know, people will buy a parcel of clients, a book of clients, dump it in, and then say, all right, well, I got a whole bunch of revenue now. But the integration piece, the value piece, you know, the value creation that you can get out of that, I think that's missing a little bit. We don't really see that much. And I think there's probably a lot of benefit to firms who probably start thinking in line with what you've just said, because they can actually create a lot more value in their own book and in an acquired book and in an acquired business, and bring more value to the people and bring greater impact essentially to the people that they're working with, if they bring that mindset. But I don't think I see it that much.
Yeah, I find that
it's changing.
I find that not so much surprising, because I've been working in and around financial advice for a long time, so I know that's the case. But it still kind of surprises me, the scope of thinking around that. So I come across all the time firms that have, been very successful by executing that acquisition strategy. So they might have bought 3 or 4 books of business, and yeah, they might be extracting some efficiency and some scale in how they're delivering. But the real opportunity is to buy a book of business that was operating on advice 1.0 and then not convert it to 2.0, but it would probably more like 3.0 now. And so what you bought, 500,000 of revenue should really be 1.2 million of revenue if you know how to do this over the course of 12 months. And that's kind of one of the areas that we're engaged with a lot with clients is how do we engage them? How do we re-engage them? How do we reprice? And then how do we deliver value outside of the blinkered scope? But when you combine those two things, then buying a book of business can be an incredibly, lucrative method for growing your business. And certainly that's far less risky when you're going about it that way, because if some of the clients leave or whatever, it doesn't really matter because you still overall have a much bigger asset than what you purchased originally. That being said, I'm also going to say that quite a lot of the time I'll find businesses that are going through an acquisition strategy and I'll say to them, why would you buy another book of business when you haven't actually done anything with this huge asset that you've got right here? How about we just generate the next doubling of your revenue is going to come right from this, and it doesn't have to take too long, and you don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really smart, because what you're really doing, if you approach it that way, is firstly, you're fixing up your house, you're fixing up your advice 1.0 to 3.0, 4.0, whatever it might be. And you're actually building a system that will work really well before you take the next step of acquiring something. So really focus inside first. Make sure you know what you're doing. And I think that's far better than going out and acquiring.
Yeah, that's not to say that acquiring businesses isn't great, because it definitely can be. And at the moment, I think there's also a lot of opportunity to, acquire books of business in a good way at the moment. But I think it's like anything. Know the strategy you're using and make sure you're doing the right things at the right time.
Well, that's right.
So if you're leaving so much on the table with your existing client book of business, why buy another one? By the same token, if you've done that with your existing book, then you're buying a book to do the same thing. And that's really where you get the exponential benefit and advantage.
That's right. But I think you make an important point there, because there's that distinction between knowing what you have and some people who don't know what they have. And that's essentially a fundamental problem, because if you don't know what you have in front of you, you're not really going to bring value to that book that you already have, to the clients that you already have. So you need to actually understand that in the first instance, I think. I think that's a really fundamental distinction.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there's a way I'd like to kind of touch on that for the financial advisors. And by the way, accountants as well. And that is that they've not really, to a significant enough degree, run their businesses as businesses. So the focus is always about, let's get the next client, as opposed to what profitability do we have per client? What is the client's scenario? Are we able to do more for that client by thinking differently? Can we add more value and therefore produce more revenue? And so what we always do when we're working with a business is we've got to collect the data. What does the business look like? What have you got? What could this business be if you just made these changes? And the focus has never really been on operating that way. It's been on delivering the service that you have and then getting the next client. And I think that has to change. And in financial advice, what you could get away with before, you can't really get away with now. And certainly with, more of the changes that are coming, you're not going to be able to do in the future. So there has to be more of a focus on what is this asset of goodwill that we have, and how can we grow that? So, which is quite interesting that I have a lawyer who's focused on doing the deal saying, I agree with you, maybe that's not always the best way to go about doing things, which just again proves the point that your number one priority is getting an outcome for clients first. So I appreciate that, Narin. And by the way, just to reiterate, as I said before, the reason that I'm speaking to Narin is because I have a few clients who've worked with him, and the comments are amazing outcome. And then I look at the price and I'm like, wow, that's a significantly better outcome for a much more cost-effective input than so many of the other scenarios I've seen. And part of the reason for that is your focus on how you're doing business and the flexibility that you bring to the table. So what I want to do as we continue on with our chat is I'd like to touch on lessons you've learned in making deals for financial advisors. But before we get to that, I want to kind of continue on with some of the things you're doing differently as a law firm, and more importantly, as a real advisor. So we talked about AI. So there's some pretty cool stuff you're doing there. Let's maybe just have a bit of a chat about that.
Sure. So, AI is thrown around quite a bit these days. Everyone's a little bit into that. And I guess, end of the day, it's just another tool, the way we see it. And what we're doing there is we teamed up with Legal Sifter out in Pittsburgh, in the US, and they built something that's really cool. It's a platform that essentially reads contracts and then spits out advice. But it does that with so much more certainty than a human could, because we get tired and a machine doesn't. And so what this platform essentially does is, it takes a contract that you normally would give your lawyer to review. It reads the clauses, and then it gives out the advice that we normally would give out. But it does that in a couple of minutes. So what that really means is, let's say we have a client who's got a service agreement, and you say, all right, well, I really want to do business with this vendor. They've given me this service agreement. It's 20 pages long, and I have to really sign it in 3 days for whatever reason. What that means is we can just put it into the system, and we've already trained the system to look for certain concepts. And to give out the advice we normally would. And it really allows the client to go and pass it through that system, get the advice that they need. And it's the same advice most of the time anyway, catered and tweaked a little bit for the client here and there. But a lot of the time, end of the day, the baseline advice is the same. You need to be aware of certain things. You need to have certain clauses in there. It just allows that to be done a lot faster. And so that's what, at least for us, that AI platform does. So what we've done is we've essentially Australicized it. So these guys out of the US, and we've taken the platform and trained it to give out the Australian concepts, essentially. So that's been pretty cool. We use it internally, and I think the best story is when one client of ours had to get a contract signed the next day. They sent it to us, and half an hour later I sent it back, and they were kind of wondering what happened. But I got it done, and there's been no problem since.
Yeah, I think that's really, really cool. I mean, I've been aware of some of the developments that have been going on behind the scenes in the legal space in the US in particular for probably nearly 10 years. But this is the first time I'm seeing that translate directly into Australian practice. And I think that's cool. I mean, it's not replacing the role of the lawyer because it still needs some human supervision, but it is significantly reducing the repetitive input from a human. And let's face it, if you're a lawyer, is that the work you really want to be doing?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because essentially what this is doing, and I feel a little bit bad for some of the the junior lawyers and graduates coming out, because if they're not tech focused or focusing on advice delivery and strategic thinking, these innovations are essentially going to cut into their jobs. So really the advisors of the next generation need to understand what's out there, and understand that these things are all tools that you have right now. But your role really sits higher, at a higher level of thinking.
Yeah, don't feel bad. It's the evolution that has to come. I mean, real advice doesn't take place at the compliance, repetitive end of things. And I think the sooner that advice professionals understand that that's a good thing, not a bad thing, the sooner they can disrupt themselves and go on to be far more valuable in their clients' lives. But it also means for people who aren't prepared to do that, they're really not going to have a role in any of the professional services. So the same thing's happening in accounting. It's happening in financial advice to a lesser degree, but that will change. And it puts the impetus on people skills. So accounting's very similar. So it used to be, you work your way through. The goal is to get to be manager, and then from manager you may build up to partnership. You don't have the people skills, and you don't want to focus on that, then you don't move past that, that kind of level. Well, nowadays there's not really much value unless you can interact with the clients. We've had Xero and other cloud-based accounting tools kind of take away a lot of the value, if there was ever value in doing the balance sheet and the P&Ls and whatever. The value's in the advice that comes as a part of that. And I think the more that AI takes away from the crutch that existed, I think the faster we can actually evolve to be real advisors. So, but it is going to be difficult for people who are coming through that don't have that focus. And I think far more reward will then be applied to professionals that have a strong EQ as well.
Well, that's right. Interestingly, we're kind of seeing some of that in financial advice businesses too. The use of some of these technologies, and there's some pretty cool practices that we're working with who are starting to implement some of these things, and really taking away the lower level work, I guess the mechanical work, that really take up a lot of people's time. And really focusing a lot more on relationships. So they're creating more relationship managers and client relationship liaisons and things like that, because they're seeing the value in that. And so we think it's pretty cool, those businesses.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because in some ways I was lucky in the first role that I had as an advisor in the financial advice space. So the company that I started with, as a young 23-year-old, they wanted me to go out and produce business, right? Now, that kind of methodology doesn't exist anymore, but it was here's a desk, here's a phone book, get clients. And it was in a commission-only role back then in the day. So unless I produced clients, I wasn't getting paid anything. So I was lucky in the sense that I had to actually produce value before I saw any. So it didn't kind of train me into thinking that, I'd do a job and then get paid. I had to produce value. The second thing that it did was I wasn't allowed to have a proper authority for the first 6 months. So I had to get clients. I wouldn't get paid if I didn't get clients, but I also wasn't allowed to give them any advice.
It's a tough situation.
Well, actually, I think it was the best situation ever, because what it allowed me to realize is the value is not in the technical advice. The value is in having someone you trust to objectively solve a problem and manage a project. They didn't care that I called in someone else, to give them structuring advice, or, called in the investment guy to do the investment portfolio advice. What they cared about was that I knew who they were and I was willing to be the relationship person to solve the problems. And so, whilst there was a lot of downsides to that first position, I was fortunate that it allowed me to understand that early on in my career. The value's not in the technical. The value is in your ability to understand the person and help them go through a series of actions to get a better outcome in their life. They don't care whether you're the one that's doing it or not. They care whether you're the one that cares enough about them to help them solve the problem.
I think it's amazing that you had that so early in your career. I mean, that probably explains why your thinking is so progressive in this area. Because to be in that situation so early on, and to be able to be mature enough to identify that, I think is pretty amazing. And you probably had a little bit of a crystal ball moment back then.
Yeah, I would love to be able to say that, I was smart enough early on to recognize the value in what I was getting. I just believe that it shouldn't be hard because that's what I was told. So I went out and did it. And I was very good at doing that. And it really helped me to understand it. But it's only, another 24 years down the track where I can look back and go, wow, I really got some good lessons out of that experience. So I'd love to claim credit for recognizing. I can't do that. The key message, however, that I would give people is, if you're in the advice space, you have to move away from the value is in doing. The value is in the money that you're looking after, or the legal situation that you're resolving, or the compliance document that you're producing. None of those things are the value. So the more you can use technology to get rid of that, the better off you're actually going to be. Because all of the value lies in your ability as an advisor to help the client solve a problem and make good decisions objectively about how to get there. And that's really where the skill is.
That's a really good summary.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of basing it on our conversation as well. So thanks for giving me great raw material, Narin. So you're doing things very differently as a law firm, and I think that should be relevant to anyone who's tuning into this, because, as I said, all of our community are advisors in one shape or form or another, and that is, the value is in the advice, and you can be flexible enough to disrupt anything else. And if you're not disrupting it, someone else is. Whether it's using, lawyers on demand, or whether it's, teaming up with an AI legal company in the US, or whether it's offshoring or whatever. If you are not disrupting the core model that was made up advice 1.0, whether it was for a lawyer or an accountant or a financial advisor or, a mortgage broker or whatever, then you're missing the point. And people will pay you for that, and that's actually what they want. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to delve into is, well, probably about 60% of our audience are in the financial advice space. And you happen to work with primarily financial advisors. I think you said that was about 80% of your business. And you help them do deals. So I kind of like to delve into, what are you seeing? What lessons have you learned? How do you help one firm do a deal with another? And what are the tips and tricks to look out for? So I don't expect you to answer that all in one go, but that's where I want to go to next. So why financial advisors? I mean, I know you fell into it, but there had to be a reason why you chose to work with other advisors. Why is that?
Well, early on in my career, um, I was starting I had a young family. First year in my job, we already had a kid. Um, Newly married, and suddenly I built up a new, essentially my place in Australia. And what I found was I happened to work with a financial advisor as a client who I actually really liked. And he actually he really cared a lot, and he made a lot of impact. So what that really meant to me was, I saw that there were people out there who really cared about other people. And essentially, at the end of the day, I think that's a very human element because, growing up, I think everyone looks up to heroes and people who really want to help other people. I think that's a really human condition. And what I found was financial advisors, really have a maximum impact, because if you're out there helping people in their personal affairs and their family affairs, that's a really intimate position to be in. And then I thought of myself as to what I wanted to become. And I really liked helping people. And I thought, well, what's the maximum impact? If I'm helping people who are helping other people, well, that's kind of a network effect, isn't it? So if I can bring what I've learned and my experience and my tools to maximum benefit of the reason why I'm here, then working with advisors really kind of expands that effect. So that's really why I really like working with financial advisors, because it's essentially an impact on a community.
You're probably not going to be able to pick it up on the webcam, but I have some goosebumps as you were talking about that. I've been asked many times, well, okay, Baz, if you were a financial advisor and you had a good business and you were successful, why did you sell it to then go and help other advisors? And at the end of the day, it's because I realized that my fulfillment came from helping advisors who want to help other people. And so I can definitely relate to that. I feel my purpose is to make advice better. And the people I like, and I know you might think I'm crazy, and I don't think you, because that makes you crazy as well. But I don't know, I really like advisors, the ones that are actually wanting to make a difference for their clients. I get it. And I want to make a difference for them because it helps them make a difference for their clients. But I've been asked that question many times. The old adage of people who can't do teach. So that was definitely not the case. It was that I started to get more fulfillment from working with the advisors that work for me. And then I found myself, even though I had my own client and this successful business to run, I kept finding myself spending time in my friends' businesses, helping them fix their financial advice and accounting firms, right, and law firms. That's kind of how I came to the realization that was actually my calling, rather than dealing with individual clients themselves. So I definitely relate to that. And I do believe in advice. And when I come across someone who's passionate about helping advisors achieve more, then obviously I want to help them as well. And that's the resonance thing that I always talk about. So what have you learned from working with advisors doing deals? What's some of your best tips? If I were to say, okay, what's your 3 best tips for when you're buying a business, right? So I'm putting you on the spot here. Your 3 best tips when you're buying a business in terms of negotiating the deal.
All right. Number one, thing number one is you got to get an advisor who is in this space. It doesn't have to be a lawyer, but it has to be an advisor who has done it before. There's no way you will be able to do it by yourself. I've been on the other side where people like to think they can do it by themselves, and it's unfortunate because they get destroyed and they just get wayward. Number one is you got to have the team. And so number one is get an advisor. It can be an M&A advisor. It can be an accountant who does this a lot, but definitely someone who knows what they're doing. Number two, it's probably focus on the terms of the deal, the commercial terms, before you go run off, signing a contract. And so I think the understanding the heads of agreement, understanding what you're selling, understanding your own business and the value that your own business actually has, I think is really important. And I think that's probably more so now because what we're really seeing is there's a lot more due diligence. And so you need to focus on your commercial terms, your commercial drivers, what really makes your business unique, or what makes the business you're acquiring unique, and get those terms down. That's going to save you a lot of time down the track when you get everyone else involved. And the third thing is probably understand that you are the captain of the transaction. You're going to have a lot of people in your ear, but you need to actually sit down, take the time out a little bit, and actually draw out a strategy. I don't think enough people actually draw out a strategy and stick to it. And so if you don't have that, it's very easy to get steered by your lawyers or your accountants or M&A advisors or even the other party on the other side, because there's so many people in a transaction, and you really need to know which direction you're heading. So I think you need to know what your strategy is. Everything else essentially falls into place based on those three things.
Yeah, well, that's some very good advice. I'm going to kind of expand on a couple of those points for context. I've also helped many firms go through the process of buying a book of business. I've helped many firms go through the process of buying a book of business to then integrate it in the most efficient way, whether it's using digital communication or service offerings or pricing or project fees or whatever it is. And that's how they buy a book of business, and instead of it being the $500,000 they bought, it's $1 million down 12 months down the track. But the first question is always, well, why are you doing it? And what have you got in front of you? And is this the right thing to do? And probably 30 or 40% of the time where I've been engaged to help with advice around that, my early advice is I don't think you should be buying a book of business at all. And what I'm tying that to here is your comment that your first tip is you've got to get advice. And this is the thing. I mean, this is so important. This is probably more important than any other concept we might talk about. If you're not someone who's going to seek external advice, it means you don't believe in what you do. And that's the number one punch in the awareness that I give to advice firms. Do you engage with external advisors? And so few of them will often do that. And then my input to them is, well, how can you actually really philosophically believe in the value of what you do if you then don't go about the process? Which is why I've always looked for advice, whether it's through business advisors, accountants, mentors, and coaches, because you can't be objective about your own scenario. And I can say this to you now, if I was buying a financial planning business, even though I've helped dozens upon dozens of transactions take place, I still wouldn't do it without an advisor of my own. So I definitely agree with you there. And on your second point, knowing what you've got in front of you, I think that's incredibly pertinent as well. I'll probably add that, and I don't know if I'd make it number 2 or number 3, would be the people in the deal. So if you don't have cultural alignment, that's what you got to be looking for first. So you've got to be looking at who are the people that are selling you. And if there's a real disconnect, then you probably shouldn't go further with the deal, no matter how lucrative the opportunity is or whatever it may be. So look for that connection. Are these people you're actually going to be able to get along with? Because 9 times out of 10, a deal going bad is going to be because of that disconnect. How would you feel about that?
Yeah, I would agree. The disconnect or the cultural fit is huge. That causes a lot of deal failure. But sometimes what I find as well is you can't really identify that really quickly. And what I like to do, I think sometimes, is you kind of have to defer that because you never know how people actually are until the pressure is on. And what I mean by that is when you actually start negotiating with the other side, that's when sometimes you actually see the true colors. And that's when you actually get a bit of an insight as to how they're actually thinking. And I've actually seen some very smart advisors start to negotiate a heads of agreement and suddenly get a really bad feeling about something. And that's why I put the term sheet as number 2, because in that process, it ties in with what you're saying there. You actually gain an insight. People are really nice when you have a lunch, you have a dinner, and you sit down around the table and everyone's splashing cash because, it's great. But when you're actually down in the nitty gritty and you start trading concessions or you start getting information, that's when you got to trust your gut and you actually see a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And now that you've said it that way, that is exactly how, you get to that point. You have to kind of bring forward the haggling, because it's only when you're actually got something down in front of you, when it's like, okay, well, here's the point, where you get to see the real colors come out. And I've seen this so many times, people agree verbally to deal terms, but when it's in paper and they've actually got something to agree to, that's when the changes start coming. Now that to a degree always happens, even if there's great alignment between parties. Yeah? So how do you then, as a lawyer operating for one of the parties, how do you then go about not becoming an obstacle to the deal and helping to resolve those, those little things that come up as part of any deal?
Yeah, so what I always like to do is I like to separate the issues out. And so this usually primarily occurs when you're doing a heads of agreement in detail or you're doing a contract. And what invariably happens is you end up with a whole bunch of issues and you all intermingle together. But the fact is you always have different kinds of issues. You have legal issues, which may be some risk items and things like that. But you actually have some more important issues, which are commercial issues. And I like to tell people that I can give you a legal position and all of those sort of things, but the more important things you need to resolve are the commercial issues. Now, it may be things like suddenly people changing multiples or people saying that a particular part of a business is not as profitable as someone else says, or arguing over key people or things like that. These are commercial items. And what I essentially say to people is, they're talking about parts of your business. This is part of your baby. You can't have me sit down there and argue on legal terms as to why certain things should be in or certain things should be out. What you need to do is you need to extract everyone. You need to understand, again, what you're selling. You need to understand your drivers. You need to understand your business. You need to sit down across the table from the other side and really hash it out. And so what I do in that situation is I say, let's everyone step aside. Let's take out a piece of paper. Let's write down the key issues. And what I find is when these commercial issues are resolved, all of the underlying legal issues, which are actually informed by these commercial items, all fall into place. And so the best advice I have down there is, sometimes you need to remove everyone to get something done, even though, you start with a bunch of people around you.
Yeah, look, I'm really glad we got to this because it was one of the things that I really wanted to focus on as well, having helped project manage and also carry out a lot of these deals myself. And that is the challenge in working with the lawyers for both parties. And I think the focus that you've given there is really important. And it stems to your philosophy that we talked about earlier on, because you have the philosophy of create an outcome first, I'm a lawyer second. That's why you're approaching it this way. And that is, we need to resolve the commercial because, if I was a lawyer and just following instructions, I'd be racking up my legal bills by rewording the legal documents to deal with the symptomatic issues. Whereas you never want to be resolving that until you've absolutely agreed on the commercial terms. Otherwise, you're just wasting time, and you're certainly wasting dollars on paying a lawyer to, go back and forward between, vendor and the various parties in the transaction, right? So I think that's a really important focal point. Narrow down the commercial terms first. I think the heads of agreement and getting to that's also important. And then resolve the legal application of that as kind of the last step in the process.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I think it has another benefit of doing it that way is instead of, I guess I call it death by amendments, where you go back and forth, you essentially, what you're doing in following this strategy is you're preserving a lot of goodwill between the parties. I mean, you're going to end up working together for a period of time. There's often an earn-out or performance-based payment. If you're already annoyed with each other before you ink the deal, it's just going to turn out bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've blown a whole bunch of your budget on, death by amendment legal fees, then that's not going to help things either.
That's right.
So what's your philosophy of engaging with the lawyers on the other side? How do you go about doing that?
Number one is you pick up the phone. That's the first thing you got to do. I mean, I'm amazed by the number of lawyers who don't do that. The ones that I really like working with, they only pick up the phone, they introduce themselves. And I mean, you got to do that because at the end of the day, you're both people, you're just trying to get something done. And by picking up the phone, you really establish a rapport. So the first thing I do every time I'm briefed by a client or briefed by an advisor or an accountant is I'll say, who's on the other side? And I'll get those details and I'll pick up the phone. Because I don't know, sometimes I don't know who they are. Sometimes I don't know where they're coming from. And I think understanding where they're coming from is really important because if you don't know that and if you don't know them, you're not going to be you're missing a whole other side of the equation.
Yeah, look, I think that's incredibly pertinent. And by the way, if you're watching this, then you're getting some great insights as to how to do deals and especially work with legal parties. Because in my experience, if you've got two lawyers that are talking to each other, then the chance of you creating a successful outcome is significantly greater. And not only that, the cost of you going through the process from a legal point of view is going to be significantly less. Because you've got an open dialogue and there's not two remote parties kind of throwing legal, versions of documents at each other and then only addressing the client instead of getting to the root issue and solving it. Makes a massive, massive, massive difference. So getting the right help as in anything, is also really, really important. So what are some of the things that you're seeing happen in recent times as far as financial advice and professional services deals? Are you seeing deals change much over the last 6 months compared to previous time?
I'd say it's been happening for a while. People are not silly. They know that things are changing. So it'll definitely be longer than 6 months, and things have been changing a little bit. I think the first thing I'm noticing more is it's taking longer to get things done, as if to get a deal done. People are more cautious, understandably so, because things are changing around them. But it's definitely taking longer to get some deals done. Um, the second thing as well is people are starting to really focus a lot more on due diligence. And due diligence has always been an important thing in transactions. But the fact is, a few years ago, people are happy to kind of get a few pieces of documents, just have a chat, maybe look over some SOAs, look over some plan files and say, yep, all right, it's all good. Let's just go. And then they rely on warranties and indemnities. And every lawyer will say, no, don't do that. It's better to go and do your DD. But you're going to spend a whole bunch of money, and people didn't really see the value in doing that. However, now people are actually focusing a lot more on the due diligence piece, and it's taking so much longer. It used to take, 2 or 3 months, for people would ink a deal. Now it's taking something 6 months, sometimes even 8, 9 months. Because it just drags on and on and on, and everyone's looking at every single thing. So that's definitely changing. Also seeing a lot of changes, I think, in the earnouts. So it used to be a pretty standard formula. Look at recurring revenue, or you look at EBIT, and maybe you have some exclusions in there, and that's pretty much it. Now people are getting a little bit more creative, the segmenting the formula a little bit, applying different multiples to different parts of the book, excluding certain categories of clients over that period. So buyers are getting a lot more savvy, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And that's definitely changed because in the past it used to be pretty easy. Everything was stable. You acquire revenue, end of 12 months, that's it. And now it's acquire, what's happening, things transferring, who's staying, who's going, what's happened to some of the revenue because some revenue is getting switched off. Some revenue is not being passed on, and that's being built into the formula, into the protection. So that's definitely changing as well.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So basically saying there's a much greater impetus for due diligence, which, by the way, should have happened anyway. And deals are taking longer, so 6 to 9 months as opposed to maybe 3 or 4. And I think that's valuable information for people to know, because if you're doing a deal properly, it's unlikely you're going to get it turned around in less than 6 months. And I think that's just a reality that a lot of people who haven't done this before may have misconceptions around. It takes time to feel things out, to put deal terms together, to do your homework, to do your due diligence, to do your to and fro. And I think build that into your expectations most definitely. That being said, there are still ones that take place in a shorter period of time. I'm seeing some of that as well. But by and large, not.
Definitely. We do see a lot of, so, some of the small ones happen really quick. I've got one client which probably has acquired, I don't know, 20, 30 over the past 18 months. But that's because the process is slick, it's streamlined, and they know what you're doing. And it can be done. But for the most part, not everyone's doing deals all the time. So if your expectation is wrong, you're going to be pretty unhappy.
So what I'm going to do now is kind of flip it. All right. And I'm going to ask the question, because I'm assuming you work both for the buyer and seller in different circumstances.
That's right.
So I'm going to flip it around and say, well, what would be your top tips for someone who's selling their business? By the way, I understand that they're probably on the front end going to be the same. Get advice, get a heads of agreement in place. right? But other than those key ones, what would be your best tips for a seller when it comes to thinking about selling their business and entering a deal?
Um, Understand why you're selling is really important. I think that's to me number one. I always ask that question: why are you selling? Are you selling because you want to go off and maybe run into another business, or are you retiring? And that's going to influence how you approach the transaction. So understanding why is really important because it also influences the concessions that you're going to give. You're going to have a buyer who's coming at it from one angle, but if you're coming at a different angle, you might not care about a whole bunch of things. They can raise a bunch of terms, and some sellers, if they have a different strategy, might be affected by that. But others who have a different strategy might say, "Well, I don't really care." So I think it's really important, number one, to know why you're selling. The second thing I think that's important is I think you need to understand that the landscape's kind of changed and buyers are maybe a bit more conservative. You're not going to take everything that you say at face value, and it's nothing personal. To be honest, it's really just people doing deals correctly. Um, so you need to understand that people are going to take their time and they're going to look at things carefully, but they're not really trying to be difficult. I mean, I've had sellers turn around and say, why do they keep asking me this information? Or why are they looking at that? And the thing is, they have to be comfortable too. And you can't turn around and say, well, I'm getting annoyed with this process. I'm going to find someone else to go buy my business. The fact is that other person is going to do the same thing. You're going to restart this whole process. So I think that's really important as well.
So would you say that it's even more important now for a seller to be prepared with this stuff ahead of time?
Definitely.
So to have the information, to know where their client lists are, their revenue reports, to have samples of SOAs, to have, um, answers for all of the questions on compliance registers and, all of that kind of stuff. They should just have all of that at the start of the process. Because
Yeah, they should have that, and they should probably have more basic things even. Um, yeah, simple things like understand your structure. There are a few times where they didn't know that they were in a trust or who was holding a contract. I mean, these are basic things that you just need to understand. So that's really important as well.
yeah, sorry. Did you have something to add to that?
No, I think that was a third point. And the third point is I think you need to open your eyes a little bit as well because the buyers out there are actually pretty savvy. And so you can't just take documents or take contracts at face value and speak to your colleagues in the industry and they'll say, oh, it's all fine. I've done a deal. Just the contract's okay. Just look for these couple of things because things are changing and deal terms are changing and the contract protections are changing. So you need to know that those changes can actually affect your ultimate outcome. So you got to be a bit wary of all those sort of changes that are happening. It's not a bad thing, but you can't just gloss over it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of those things. And I'd probably add, be aware of, like in a deeper sense, how the variables that your key negotiation variables, how they actually affect your effective sale price. Because if you've got, longer payout terms, that's actually reducing your effective sale price. And all of the different things that you can change in the variable structure, how they affect you, and which are the ones that are going to be things that actually affect your end outcome. As you said before, some of them may not affect you, but being prepared to know if you give up certain amount of terms on one side, how is that actually affecting things? An example of that, as a buyer, I would be far less concerned by the upfront multiple. Um, and if a buyer was really focused on the upfront multiple, then I can give them their headline number that they might be satisfied with, but I can then negotiate all of the other terms which they're not as focused on, which actually affect the effective sale price that I'm paying. So I think really be aware of that before you go into negotiation is something that I would say. By the way, I'd give that advice whether it was to a buyer or a seller.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a pretty key point, and I think you touched on the variables, and I think that's just it's something that's not really thought about that much. But the variables can be tweaked in various permutations, and they can have vastly different outcomes. The simple things like definition of sale client. What does that mean? Is it a list, or is it a list plus people you introduce? Is it a list plus people you introduce plus people who are introduced by people on that list? Each of these variables have very different outcomes. So you need to be aware of those things.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. And of course, that leads to the bit of make sure you get decent advice. And whether you like it or not, one of your team in that advice, whether you've got business advice and strategy, is going to be the lawyer. So I think we managed to find a decent one. And it's been a pleasure having a chat to you about all of those things today, as well. So, mate, look, I've kind of kept you online for a reasonable period of time now. I want to thank you hugely. So the two things that I think we've been able to provide insight into is, number one, laws being disrupted by people like Narin. You don't have to do things in a conventional way. The value is in the outcome, not the technical expertise that you have. And then from a deal structuring point of view, you really need to understand what you're doing and make sure you've got the right input for it. I think if you're considering buying a book of business or selling a book of business at the moment, it's probably more important than ever that you actually get external input. For example, I've had sellers come to me over the last 6 to 12 months saying, look, I want to get out. I'm tired of all of this stuff. So I want to just negotiate the best price. And my input to them is, well, if you stay for 12 months and you make these changes in your business won't be worth half as much as it was 2 years ago. It'll be worth, 1.5 times as much as it was 2 years ago. And simply by the process of better effectively engaging clients. So it works, what we were talking about earlier works both ways. And if you're buying a book of business, then I would be looking at the opportunity to do exactly that same thing. Not just buy it and bolt it in and to extract efficiencies that way, but to buy it, bring it into your business, and then to use that as a platform to double the revenue and exponentially increase the value to that existing client book. So that's kind of my takeaways. Is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I would probably say that for me, personal takeaways, I really liked how you identified that advisors can remove those blinders, apply a greater, deeper level of thinking in their clients, because I really don't see that very much. I know you talk about it a lot, and I know you work with people like that, but I don't see it very much, and I see that across the board. Remove your blinders. There's a lot of talk about niching into things, but the fact is you niche, but you also need to sometimes come up for air. And I think that's really a really key takeaway.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And if I were to share some of my own experience, when I sold my advice firm, I decided to focus on developing IP and systems around areas that, no one else was doing, like social media and video and digitizing and client engagement and groupification of client advice and digital marketing and, all of these kind of things that back then no one else even had a clue about. And what I've come to the realization is that all of that stuff's great, but most advisors haven't got their existing business models right. And they certainly haven't taken advantage of the far greater opportunity there is to deliver more value to their existing clients. And it's been through that process where, the firms we've worked with are having millions of % return from spending their first, year with us even. So if I'll just give you an example of that. Today I had a meeting with one of the firms that we work with. And this financial planning business. So, an elderly lady, she's in her mid-70s, got 4 adult children, and her husband's passed away, and there's a significant amount of wealth. So I think it's about $7.5 million. A lot of that's tied up in property. So only a small amount, say 600,000 or 700,000, was in superannuation, which, by the way, producing more than enough income for this 70-year-old lady. And in a traditional financial planning sense, this advisor would get their $6,000 or $7,000 fee for managing that part. And instead we've worked through with them to put a proposal to the client. Here's how we're going to help you pass on the wealth, how we're going to meet and consult with each of your adult daughters so they don't blow it up. Here's how we're going to do that over a period of time. Here's how we're going to help you plan out your life and get the most fulfillment out of it. And, that's turning into a $80,000, $90,000 fee. But for something the clients are saying, wow, this is actually what we really want, and it's changing our entire lives. And we see that happen over and over and over again. And in the traditional sense of financial advice, they either would have given some of that away for free or never done any of it, and certainly never done it to the same transformative extent. And I think financial advisors and accountants in particular are perfectly placed to be able to help their clients solve all kinds of problems in their lives. And the beauty of that is no SOA required for coaching the kids through this stuff. They don't need huge amounts of team members, and it's really disrupting the idea of what financial advice is. It's certainly not portfolio management and product placement. So, mate, thank you very much. I'm really excited to work with you in the future. I certainly know that I'm going to be sending some of our clients your way, and I'll certainly be looking forward to interviewing you again. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that we've got left to talk about. So, mate, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to the next one, working with you too.
Awesome, Narin.
Can bring a bit of value.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Bye-bye.